The coffee machine gurgled its final, comforting sigh, and the rich aroma filled our little home on wheels, a scent that had become synonymous with freedom, with mornings spent waking up to an ever-changing masterpiece just outside our window. Today, that masterpiece was a sweep of Scottish glen, mist clinging to the heather-purpled slopes like a shy lover, the air crisp and carrying the faint, earthy smell of damp peat and distant pines. Karen was humming, a little off-key tune that was pure, unadulterated contentment, as she poured 2 steaming mugs. Her silhouette, framed by the van's back window, was a study in peaceful energy, a stark contrast to the woman who, just a few short years ago, had looked at me with wide, slightly panicked eyes and declared, "Mark, this van life thing. It'll never work. Not for us. Not for me." "Happy Vanniversary, love," I said, taking my mug, the ceramic warm against my palms. She turned, that familiar crinkle appearing at the corners of her eyes, the one that always signaled a genuine smile. "Happy Vanniversary to you too, Mr. I told you so," she replied, her voice light. "Though you've been remarkably restrained in actually saying it. It's more satisfying watching you prove yourself wrong every single day," I chuckled. And it was true. Today marked 3 years. 3 years since we'd sold the house, shed the skins of our old, predictable lives, and pointed Rosie, our trusty, slightly battered, but utterly beloved camper van, towards the horizon. The plan for our 3rd vanniversary was simple, just like our lives had become. A scenic drive through this wild, breathtaking landscape, a hike to a viewpoint a local had told us offered a wee glimpse of heaven, and then a special dinner, cooked right here in Rosie, accompanied by a bottle of something decent we'd been saving. And, most importantly, a good long reminisce. Especially about Karen's journey from staunch skeptic to chief van life evangelist. We began our usual morning dance, a practiced choreography in a small space. I stowed the bedding while Karen cleared the breakfast things. We checked maps, debated routes, the paper kind, mostly, a delightful anachronism we both enjoyed. Karen was meticulously packing a small rucksack, water, some oatcakes, a miniature first aid kit. Her old cautious self still made guest appearances, and I loved her for it, and her binoculars. "Never know what feathered friends we might spot," she'd said, already scanning the hillside. I watched her, a wave of affection washing over me. The woman who once worried about missing her creature comforts, her manicured garden, her weekly book club, was now more excited about identifying a rare bird than any social engagement from our past. "Ready for another adventure, then?" I asked, slinging my own small pack over my shoulder. Karen grinned, a flash of pure enthusiasm. "Always. Especially if it involves proving my past self spectacularly wrong." Again. Rosie rumbled to life, her diesel engine a familiar, comforting thrum. We eased out of our secluded overnight spot, the gravel crunching under the tires, and onto a narrow, single-track road that wound its way deeper into the glen. The landscape was utterly captivating. Mountains, ancient and stoic, loomed on either side, their peaks occasionally wreathed in stubborn clouds that seemed reluctant to reveal the full majesty beneath. Waterfalls, like silver ribbons, tumbled down rocky crags, their distant roar a soft counterpoint to Rosie's engine. Karen was in her element, co-pilot extraordinaire, map spread across her lap, occasionally peering through her binoculars. "Oh, Mark, look," she exclaimed, pointing towards a patch of gorse. "Is that a stonechat?" "I think it is." Her excitement was infectious. These were the moments, small and seemingly insignificant, that made up the rich tapestry of our new life. The freedom to stop, to observe, to simply be present in a way our old routines had never allowed. We were ambling, not rushing, savoring each twist and turn of the road. Then, around a particularly sharp bend, we encountered our first challenge of the day. Not a breakdown, thankfully. Rosie had been surprisingly well behaved of late, but a woolly, four-legged roadblock. A large flock of sheep, blissfully unaware of our vanniversary schedule, had decided the middle of the road was the perfect place for a leisurely congregation. They eyed us with mild, cud-chewing indifference. Karen started to laugh. Well, this wasn't on the itinerary. In the early days, this might have flustered her. A delay, an unknown, a disruption to the plan. She would have tapped her fingers, sighed, perhaps even suggested turning back. But the Karen beside me now simply leaned back in her seat, a smile playing on her lips. "Reminds me of that time in the Pyrenees, remember? With the cows?" she said, her eyes sparkling with the memory. We thought we'd never get through. Instead of frustration, there was amusement, a shared history of minor travel absurdities. This, right here, was a turning point, not in our journey, but in my constant, quiet observation of her transformation. She was no longer just tolerating the unpredictability, she was reveling in it. We waited patiently, exchanging pleasantries with the shepherd who eventually ambled into view, his dogs working with impressive efficiency to clear our path. The delay was perhaps 20 minutes, but it felt like a gift, a moment to just sit and absorb the sounds and smells of the glen. The shepherd, a man whose face was a roadmap of wind and weather, gave us a nod and a tip. "If ye're headin' for Bain Rood viewpoint," he said, gesturing vaguely up the valley, "the usual track might be a bit boggy after last night's rain. There's a wee path, just past the Crooked Oak, a bit rougher, but drier. And the views, och, they're grand." We thanked him, and Karen, ever the keen navigator, immediately began consulting the map, a determined glint in her eye. Crooked Oak," she murmured, tracing a line with her finger. "I think I see what he means. It looks like it might even cut off that rather steep bit we were looking at. The detour, if we chose to take it, might actually lead us somewhere even better, or at least via a more interesting route." This was the essence of it, wasn't it? The willingness to deviate, to trust a local's advice over a pre-plotted line on a map. We found the Crooked Oak, a magnificent, gnarled old tree that looked as though it had weathered centuries of Scottish storms. The path was indeed rougher, little more than a sheep track in places, winding upwards through bracken and heather. It was challenging, but in a good way. We had to pick our way carefully, sometimes using our hands for balance. Karen, surprisingly, was in the lead, her earlier caution replaced by a focused determination. She pointed out tiny alpine flowers I would have missed, the intricate patterns of lichen on the rocks, the way the light changed as we climbed higher. "This is invigorating," she called back to me, her cheeks flushed, a sheen of perspiration on her forehead. And then, as we rounded a rocky outcrop, the path opened onto a small, hidden plateau we hadn't seen on any map, a place the main trail would have bypassed entirely. Before us, the glen spread out in a breathtaking panorama, even more expansive and wild than we had imagined. The original viewpoint was still some way off, higher up, but this was magical. Unexpected. Ours. We stood there for a long moment, just drinking it in. The wind tugged gently at our hair, carrying the cries of distant birds. The sun, now higher in the sky, had burned off most of the mist, revealing the full grandeur of the surrounding peaks. "You know," Karen said, turning to me, her eyes shining, "I think this is our spot. Forget the other viewpoint. This feels right. Don't you think?" Her question wasn't seeking permission, but sharing a certainty. This was her aha moment. The original plan, the meticulously researched hike, suddenly seemed less important than the beauty of this serendipitous discovery. She was no longer a slave to the itinerary, she was co-authoring the adventure as it unfolded. "It's perfect," I agreed, meaning it. Absolutely perfect. Our own private Vanniversary viewpoint, the decision was made, not through lengthy discussion, but through a shared glance, an unspoken understanding that had grown between us, nurtured by 3 years of shared miles and moments like these. This flexibility, this ability to pivot and embrace the unexpected, was one of the greatest gifts Vanlife had given us, and Karen, more than anyone, had learned to unwrap it with joy. With the decision made to celebrate here, Karen sprang into action with an energy that was pure delight. Right then, she declared, shrugging off her rucksack. "Let's make this official." She scouted for the flattest patch of grass, the one with the most uninterrupted view, her movements efficient and purposeful. Gone was the woman who once needed a five-star hotel to feel comfortable. Here she was, arranging a tartan travel rug on a patch of wild Scottish hillside like she was preparing a royal banquet. She unpacked the oatcakes, a small flask of still-warm tea we'd brought, and a couple of apples, arranging them with an almost ceremonial care. I watched, a lump of affection in my throat. This wasn't just about a picnic, it was about her claiming this lifestyle, making it her own, finding her joy in its simplicity. The sun climbed higher, warming the ancient stones around us. We sat on the rug, side by side, munching on oatcakes and sipping tea, the silence comfortable, punctuated only by the whisper of the wind and the distant bleating of sheep. The conversation, when it began, flowed easily, drifting back not just over the last 3 years, but further, to the time before. To the life we'd left behind, and the conversations that had led us here. "Do you remember," I began, smiling, "that first brochure I brought home? The one with the gleaming, impossibly pristine campervan parked beside a turquoise lake, with a ridiculously good-looking couple laughing over a bottle of champagne?" Karen chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "Oh, I remember. I think my exact words were, 'Mark, are you having a midlife crisis? Because if you are, can't you just buy a sports car like a normal person?' And then you listed all the reasons it wouldn't work," I prompted gently. "The lack of space, the public showers, missing your friends, the cooking facilities, or lack thereof, as you perceived them." I wasn't trying to rub it in, but to marvel at the distance she traveled, not just geographically, but internally. We were building towards our peak moment of the day, not just a scenic vista, but a shared acknowledgement of her incredible, inspiring shift in perspective. The real celebration, our Vanniversary feast, was still to come when we returned to Rosie, but this quiet interlude on the hillside felt like the true heart of it. As the afternoon light began to soften, painting the glen in hues of gold and amber, Karen finally turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I was so scared." It was an admission I'd heard in fragments before, but never so directly, so openly. Scared of giving up what was familiar. Scared of, well, of being uncomfortable, I suppose. Scared of not being Karen who has it all together. She picked at a loose thread on the rug. "I'd built this life, this routine, and it felt safe. The thought of dismantling it, of stepping into something so unknown, it was terrifying." I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. "I know you were, love. And you were incredibly brave to even consider it, let alone do it." This was it, the culmination of the day's gentle reflections. Not a grand vista conquered, but a quiet, honest conversation about fear and transformation, shared in a place of profound beauty that we'd found by abandoning the original plan. Karen squeezed my hand. "It wasn't just bravery, Mark. It was you. You didn't push, but you didn't give up either. You just kept painting this picture of possibility. And then, when we rented that first van for a weekend, and it rained non-stop, and the heater was dodgy, and I still, somehow, had a glimmer of fun. That's when I thought, maybe, just maybe, there's something to this." She smiled, a soft, wistful expression. "But even then, I couldn't have imagined this." She gestured around them, at the vast, silent beauty. "I couldn't have imagined this feeling of lightness. Of not being tied down by things, by expectations." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but her smile didn't falter. It was a tear of release, of joy. I was so wrong about so many things. About what I needed to be happy. "So, if past Karen could see present Karen now," I asked, my voice a little thick with emotion, "what would she say?" Karen laughed, a sound that echoed softly in the quiet air. "She'd probably faint. Then she'd ask where I bought this incredibly practical fleece and if my hair was supposed to look like I'd been dragged through a hedge backwards." She paused, then her expression grew serious again, but in a deeply contented way. "No, honestly. I think she'd be amazed. Amazed that the things she feared losing, comfort, security, routine, were actually the things holding her back. Amazed that true happiness wasn't in a perfectly ordered life, but in the glorious, beautiful chaos of living it, we raised our now empty tea mugs in a silent toast. To Karen. To Rosie. To 3 years of glorious, beautiful chaos. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows in the glen began to lengthen. It was a moment of profound connection, etched against a backdrop of wild, timeless beauty, a quiet triumph not over a mountain, but over old fears. As the air began to cool and the first stars pricked the darkening sky, we carefully packed away our meager picnic things, leaving the hillside as pristine as we'd found it. The walk back down the rough track, guided by the beams of our head torches, was surprisingly quick, our steps lighter, our hearts full. Rosie waited patiently by the crooked oak, a welcoming yellow glow spilling from her windows where we'd left a small light on. Getting back into the van felt like coming home, a feeling Karen had once sworn she'd never associate with something on wheels. "Cozy, isn't it?" she murmured, sinking onto her side of the bench seat with a contented sigh. "Best house in the world," I replied, starting the engine. We didn't drive far, just a mile or so back to the secluded spot where we'd spent the previous night, a place we knew was quiet and permitted. The original plan for a fancy vanniversary dinner cooked from scratch now seemed almost too much effort. Instead, Karen pulled out the good cheese we'd bought in a little village shop, some artisan bread, and the bottle of red wine we'd been saving. Simple, perfect. "That view today," Karen said, pouring the wine into our sturdy camping tumblers, "it was something else. And the fact that we just stumbled upon it. That made it even more special." She swirled the wine, gazing into its ruby depths. "I used to plan everything meticulously, you know. Holidays, dinner parties, even my weekends. If something didn't go according to plan, I'd get so stressed." She took a sip. Now the unplanned bits are often the best bits. I wouldn't trade this feeling, this freedom, for all the perfectly curated experiences in the world." I just nodded, my heart swelling. Her words were a gift, a testament to how far she'd come, how much she'd embraced this unpredictable, wonderful life. The day's most memorable moments weren't about conquering a specific peak, but about the journey itself, the unexpected discoveries, and the quiet joy of simply being together in a beautiful place. Later, tucked into our surprisingly comfortable bed, the curtains drawn against the Scottish night, the only sounds the gentle sigh of the wind outside and the distant hoot of an owl, the conversation deepened. We weren't just talking about a good day, we were talking about a good life, a life reinvented. "It's funny, isn't it?" Karen mused, her voice soft in the darkness. "When you're younger, you think life after 50 is all about winding down, about comfort and predictability. You think adventure is for the 20-somethings." She shifted, turning to face me. "I genuinely believed my adventurous days were behind me. I thought I was content with my garden and my book club." "And were you?" I asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear her articulate it. "I thought I was," she admitted. "But it was a passive contentment. Like being wrapped in a warm blanket, but never actually going out into the sunshine. I was existing, not truly living. This," she squeezed my arm, "this is living. Even the challenging bits, the breakdowns, the getting lost, the time the toilet chemicals spilled everywhere." We both chuckled at that memory, a low point that had, in retrospect, become one of our funnier anecdotes. "Even those bits are part of it. They teach you things. They show you what you're capable of." This, I thought, was the core of it. This was why we shared our stories, why we kept Rosie trundling along highways and byways. It wasn't just about pretty views, though there were plenty of those. It was about the human capacity for change, for growth, even when society, or your own inner voice, tells you it's too late. Karen's journey from skeptic to enthusiast was a powerful narrative, one that resonated with so many people who felt stuck in their own routines, dreaming of someday. Our vanniversary wasn't just celebrating 3 years on the road, it was celebrating Karen's courage to say yes to a life she never thought she wanted, and in doing so, finding a happiness she never knew was possible. It reinforced our belief that life isn't about a destination, but about the richness of the journey, especially when you're sharing it with someone who's willing to navigate the unexpected detours with you. The real lesson, the one that echoed in the quiet van that night, was that the fear of change is almost always greater than the reality of it. Karen had feared losing comfort, but she'd gained freedom. She'd feared losing routine, but she'd gained spontaneity. She'd feared missing her old life, but she'd found a new one that was infinitely more vibrant and fulfilling. Her smile, which these days was almost a permanent fixture, was the most eloquent testimony to that. It was a smile born of genuine contentment, of waking up each day with a sense of adventure rather than obligation. "So," I whispered, "no regrets then? About trading the rose bushes for Rosie the van?" She snuggled closer. "Not a single one. Though I do sometimes miss my bathtub. But then I remember I can have a different view from my bathroom window every single day, and the bathtub seems less important." She was quiet for a moment. "The only regret would have been not trying. Thank you for not letting me talk myself out of the best decision I never knew I wanted to make." The moral of our Vanniversary story, and indeed our whole van life chapter, was simple: listen to that little voice of curiosity, dare to step off the well-trodden path, because sometimes the most beautiful views are found where you least expect them, and the greatest adventures begin when you're brave enough to say, maybe, just maybe, this could work. The next morning, as the sun painted the glen in soft morning hues once more, we sat with our coffee, already discussing possibilities. "That little fishing village we passed yesterday," Karen said, consulting our well-worn map, "it looked charming. And I saw a sign for a coastal path. Fancy a bit of sea air today." The energy, the anticipation for what the new day might bring, was palpable. Our Vanniversary had been perfect, not because of grand gestures, but because it reaffirmed everything we loved about this life. It was another beautiful day on the road, another page turned in our ongoing adventure. And as we drove, I couldn't help but glance over at Karen. She was gazing out of the window, a soft smile on her face, humming that same slightly off-key tune from the day before. The woman who once thought van life would never work for her was now the heart and soul of our journey, her spirit as expansive and inspiring as the landscapes we explored. So, to all of you out there who might be dreaming of a change, big or small, especially if you think your adventurous days are behind you, let our story be a little nudge. It's rarely too late, and you're often far more capable and adaptable than you give yourself credit for. Karen is living proof. Thanks for joining us on this little Vanniversary reflection, for sharing this part of our journey. We hope it brought you a bit of warmth, a touch of inspiration, and maybe even a chuckle or two. Until next time, keep living fully, 1 mile, 1 story at a time.